I'll simply say, I suppose this is going to be at Quantico because that's the only base I can think of that could accommodate a large number of people like that. That want us to stay entangled and embroiled in the Middle East against the various states and people that Israel wants to attack. Also back this unending war in Ukraine against Russia. And again, we got to go back to the banking cartels in New York City and the city of London, what I guess you might call multi-jurisdictional vaults. One in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. They're going to have another one in Hong Kong. This is beyond the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And our currency is being debased. And increasingly, nobody wants it. So the Chinese are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars worth of our treasuries, ultimately near hypersonic device, missile, whatever that can strike with great precision shows up, then that will have an effect on the Russians. The Russians will say, well, do we wait until these things are all... And it may have something to do with broader policy regarding where we're headed next. It may have something to do with his wanting to impart a message of what's important to him or the president.
Okay, there we go. You know, as president of the United States, the answer is yes. He could profoundly influence that outcome. On the other hand, we haven't seen much evidence that he's behaved like President of the United States. He behaves more like someone implementing guidance and guidelines from Mr. Netanyahu. So to answer that question, we'll have to wait and see. Well, part of me instinctively wants to say that people could actually get a lot of work done that's positive and useful for the American people in the absence of all these flag officers, but I don't want to go there right now. So I'll simply say, I suppose this is going to be at Quantico because that's the only base I can think of that could accommodate a large number of people like that. And it may have something to do with broader policy regarding where we're headed next. It may have something to do with his wanting to impart a message of what's important to him or the president. You know, he's certainly not going to tell half of them that you're no longer needed and you're fired. I think that's very unlikely. So, but it is unusual. Let's say that, just to jump back on the Trump-Netanyahu relationship, I neglected to run this. Our mutual friend and my former Fox colleague, Tucker Carlson, has spoken very, very directly about this. Here's what he said just 2 or 3 days ago. Chris, number 26. I mean, Bibi's running. This is a fact. I'm not guessing about this because I talked to people he said it to, is running around the Middle East, his region and his own country, and telling people point blank, just stating it. I control the United States. I control Donald Trump. He's saying that, and again, I'm not guessing at all. That's a fact. And I dare them to say that's not true because it is true and they know it's true. So I'm an American. How do you think it makes me feel even you? The only comment I can make is that I have sources in various places who've told me the same thing. I'm not sure that's really new. I think most everybody in the region knows that Mr. Netanyahu is in a position to deliver on Trump. In other words, whatever he wants, he's going to get. So that's not really news. I guess it's shocking to the American people, and it should be, but they'd better wake up and figure out who's really running the show. And that's not Donald Trump. Chris, can we put up the full screen from Truth Social where the president says it's time for Ukraine to win? I know you've seen this, Colonel, but just so we're on the same page here, the president posted this after he spoke at the UN, then met with President Zelensky. He posted this. I'm reading it. I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win, in caps, all of Ukraine back in its original form with time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO. Now I'm editorializing 3 ardors of whose budget is paid by the U.S. Now I'm reading again. The original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? How dangerous is this kind of a U-turn from the President of the United States before we even get into debt and delusion. I think the Moscow is unsurprised. They're seeing the final transformation of Donald Trump into Biden too. So for all intents and purposes, that's what you've got right now, Biden too. Certainly as far as foreign and defense policy is concerned, and even in some areas of domestic policy, everybody is disappointed. But it reaffirms something that Tucker said, because many of the same forces that want us to stay entangled and embroiled in the Middle East against the various states and people that Israel wants to attack also back this unending war in Ukraine against Russia. And again, we got to go back to the banking cartels of New York City and the city of London. They're very much interested in keeping everything going as it is. And then on top of that, you have your so-called globalist governments in places like London, Paris, and Berlin who fear an end to this war because they know if it ends anytime soon, they're going to be eliminated as the leaders of their respective countries. They're losing airspeed and altitude very, very quickly. So all in all, none of us should be terribly surprised, but we all have a right to be disappointed. And of course, remember, we haven't even talked about the potential for yet another conflict, a new one, to emerge in Venezuela. So all of this suggests that President Trump has walked away from just about everything he said he would do or not do. Before I play your favorite senator from South Carolina beaming over this, I want to play the president more or less restating it in the presence of President Macron. Now, Macron, in your view and mine, has crazy ideas about Europe and where they're going to get their money from and whether Russia's going to occupy Paris and all that nonsense. However, look at the sort of biting my tongue look on President Macron's face as President Trump articulates this. It's time for Russia to win back what the it's time for Ukraine to win back what the Russians have taken. It's been a terrible war, should have ended, and Russia should have stopped it. But they've been 3.5 years, and they've gotten so far. So we'll see what happens. But the other side can fight too, and they've proven that. Maybe it could be that Russia is a paper tiger. I don't know what they are, but 3.5 years of fighting and killing everybody, of killing 7,000 people a week for nothing. So it's a very sad situation, but most of you have seen the recent statement I put out a little while ago, and I'm glad you got it. But I feel that way. I really do feel that way. Let them get their land back. Yep. So we'll see how it all works out. Not a chance. Impossible. But this is, phenomenal. It exemplifies the level of ignorance and self-delusion that is widespread in the West and an unwillingness to see reality. There's no willingness to admit that Russia is absolutely no paper tiger. As I wrote it, if anything, it appears more and more like an impregnable fortress. Russia is victorious. Russia is now well prepared for anything that we throw at them, up to and including nuclear weapons, I'm afraid. And that's what worries me the most, that this sort of stupidity and ignorance could inadvertently cause a major conflict between ourselves and the Russians that is completely unnecessary and counterproductive. The lack of knowledge and understanding of what's going on in the region, the history, culture, and geography, everything is just so damaging. I don't know where to begin. And that's why I wrote War Debt and Delusion now. We'll talk about that, I hope. Well, explain to us the problems as you see them with debt. I mean, we're running a $37 trillion debt with the big, beautiful bill, as Trump and the Republic repans call it. Assuming there's no changes to it, that'll be up to $41 trillion by the time he leaves office. The military-industrial complex continues to be enriched. He claims that the NATO countries are paying for this equipment They're probably paying for it with money borrowed from us, which we don't have, so we printed it. This is a mess. The world is discovering that fiat currency can always be diluted in terms of its value. They're also discovering, once again, that gold retains its value. And so we're watching the world gradually, step by step, shift out of the dollar system and move increasingly towards gold-backed currencies. The most prominent of those currencies right now, I think that's emerging, is the yuan and China. The Chinese have set up what I would call a pro-gold exchange. And of course, this is being organized with the Saudis. And this effectively going to replace your pro-dollar. Now, what is this? Well, the Chinese are opening what I guess you might call multi-jurisdictional vaults. One in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. They're going to have another one in Hong Kong. This is beyond the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And these are effectively warehouses for massive quantities of gold. And that means that when China and Saudi Arabia do business, they will do business in their respective currencies because both of those currencies could be reclaimed as gold. In other words, China buys oil and gas. The Saudis buy whatever they do from the Chinese, whether it's military equipment or anything else, and both sides have access to the warehouse. And as a result, they can move that gold into their portion of the warehouse. In other words, it completely bypasses the dollar. And this is a global effort underway right now to de-dies. In the meantime, we're simply debasing the currency. We continue to replenish the monetary supply, the money supply by 6-7%. And the more you print, the less it's worth. Simply the truth. You don't need complex mathematics to figure that out. And our currency is being debased. And increasingly, nobody wants it. So the Chinese are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars worth of our treasuries. Ultimately, I think they'll dump all of them. And they're not the only ones. The Japanese, the Saudis, and others that hold substantial portions of our debt are shedding the United States Treasury, which in their judgment is dead weight. They're losing money. They want to get out of it. And increasingly, people don't want to do business in the dollar. Now, the Chinese banking system, per se, that's backing much of this, is not yet as sophisticated and complex as our own. But they're moving there very, very rapidly, and it would be a mistake to believe that the world is going to rely on our SWIFT system indefinitely. It's just not going to happen. This is very, very dangerous. This is as dangerous as open warfare with Russia for the United States and the Republic. So this is classic economics 101, which the government never follows. Yeah. Well, all you have to do is go on and listen to the various experts talk about the collapse of the real estate market that's coming. And when that collapses, that's one of the pillars of wealth in the United States. As you well know, suddenly the thing that everybody has poured money into is going to turn out to be worth very, very little. You know, back during the Weimar Republic, with a very small few ounces of gold, you could walk in and buy beautiful homes. That's how bad it got. I think you're going to see something similar to that here in the United States. Well, you're asking a very important question, and unfortunately, none of us have ears in the Kremlin, but we have to assume a couple of things. President Putin is going to watch very carefully to see just exactly what shows up in Western Ukraine from the NATO members, primarily Great Britain, France, and Germany, and the United States. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if all of a sudden vast quantities of SM-6 missiles, this is your standard near hypersonic device missile, whatever, that can strike with great precision, shows up, then that will have an effect on the Russians. The Russians will say, well, do we wait until these things are all fully deployed and operational, or do we strike first? They're going to wait and see if these Taurus missiles show up. If those kinds of things happen, then the Russians will be inclined to take very, very decisive action and move their forces further west. They're already on the outskirts of Odessa. They've got plenty of people on the ground west of the upper river. They just haven't brought over the weight of their conventional force. That could be done very quickly. So Odessa could fall in a space of a few days. I know that NATO members have sent some of their forces, particularly French and I'm told some British, into Odessa. But like the Russians, these are in very small numbers and they appear to be special forces types. But all of this points in the direction of an escalating war. And again, the Russians have to ask, how long do we wait before this poses a real existential threat to us? Or do we just wait? Wait or not wait? That's the question. And I don't know the answer to that. But I think President Putin probably has more fundamental concrete support from the Russian population now than ever. And there is no question in anybody's minds about the justice of his cause. Everybody has seen all the material from the Bo labs that were discovered. They know what terrible things the CIA were involved with and planning. They know that the Ukrainians are now herding men in their late 50 seconds, 60 seconds in the uniform to go become cannon fodder. They know that there are people in Ukraine openly talking about huge quantities of money that can be made by child and trafficking, human trafficking, as well as resale of goods, sale of mineral resources. And of course, Zelensky's been selling off agricultural land to the BlackRock and others. All of this is known in Moscow, and Moscow has to make the decision, are we moving forward? Do we continue to go forward? Do we finally put an end to this regime, or do we wait until it gets worse? I don't know that answer, but I think President Putin is not surprised, sadly, by what President Trump has done. Remember, President Putin, on more than one occasion, has pointed out that he's watched every president transform into some version of John McCain. He didn't say John McCain, but effectively that's what he's saying. That's where we are. Trump, 2028, I hope this never ends. When he asked, what should you do if a Russian jet flies into your country, shoot it down? He's tried to go out of his way to get Putin to the table. We don't want to humiliate Russia. We just want to end the war. And to our friends in Russia, here's what Trump did today. He told NATO, I'll sell you all the weapons you want. You can provide them to Ukraine. And as to Ukraine, you can use them any way you want. So to the Russian military, you're going to be up against the high-end American weapons that will be sold to NATO for the benefit of Ukraine. And this war is coming to your backyard here with no limitations like Biden. Well, that's exactly right. He's consigning Ukraine to total destruction, and he's opening the very real possibility that we end up becoming part of the war. You know, Americans have this assumption that we sit in isolation, we're invulnerable, invincible, and no one will challenge us. That's not true. And the thing we have to understand is that what we're seeing happen in the economic world, in other words, the world of the petrodollar that's vanishing from our standpoint, the emergence of new gold-backed currencies and a new financial system called BRICS is matched in the military sphere. In other words, all of these countries are watching what we're doing. They want to get out of the dollar's way, but if we go to war stupidly, even if it's accidental with the Russians, Russia will have no shortage of friends. Now, I thought it was interesting that he talked about his friends in Russia or our friends in Russia. I don't think we have very many friends there. So if he thinks he's going to threaten or frighten the Russians, he's lost his mind. There's no chance. The Russians are not afraid. In fact, there are a lot of Russians that would welcome the opportunity to slam us down. Talk about one thing that he keeps bringing up. Well, shoot down these Russian aircraft. There are no Russian aircraft violating our airspace. That's all nonsense. From Finland all the way down to the Black Sea, the Russians are not deliberately going into our airspace. They haven't sent anything in there deliberately. And these 19 drones that everybody is, continues to fume about were all reconnaissance, and none of them had anything to do with delivering weapons. And finally, we're not even sure how they got there, but the Russians have given us all the information we could want. They've opened the kimono, so to say, so that we can investigate it. We don't want to investigate it. We're looking for a reason to attack Russia. The Russians aren't going to give it to us. That's the whole, and everybody that's coming there knows that, and I think is looking forward to it. But just keep something in mind. I think since last night, we're down to 9 or 10 seats. So almost all are sold. So I hope others will come in, because we want you there. We want people to express their views. We plow more and more and more and more money into education. We get less and less and less out. Who has stood up and said, look, it obviously doesn't work, so let's devise a new system that can work? Nobody ever says that. No. Give us more money. You have the same problem in healthcare. We spend more money than anybody else in the world on healthcare. But you can go to Finland, you can go even to Italy right now. Any number of European countries and other countries in the world get a hell of a lot more bang for your buck in healthcare than you're going to get here. It's over every single fact that led us to this war. But it's hate speech nonstop. And Trump participated in that. And it is with all the claims of these provocations and all the rest, and the open discussion this week about shooting down Russian planes, the kind of blind rage that can lead to an event that leads to another event that leads to another event, with these this hatred and this vituperation already stoked. And then, because these leaders are able to command missile systems, they don't need to ask their publics for approval, of which the publics absolutely do not approve of. What is happening right now, a devastating war could soon befall us. And if this seems just kind of being afraid of the rhetoric and so forth, how many wars start with an incident, with an insult, with an accidental or false flag event that triggers a spiral rapidly of escalation? A large number, World War I. The war that destroyed every hope for peace for the next century in its way started, of course, with an assassination by some young kids of the Archduke of the Habsburg Empire. But one can name countless such cases. And this is what we are walking along in this abyss. We're right at the edge of terrible accidents happening without diplomacy, without honesty, without reflection, without maturity, without consistency, without guardrails. And we continue to come closer and closer to the edge. I think that the greatest threat at the moment is the assumption or delusion of escalation control, that we can continue to escalate the rhetoric actions, but still be able to bring it down in when we want to. I think this miscalculation is just a disaster waiting to happen. And we see now that the Russian Orishnik missiles are heading to Belarus because, again, they see this as a real threat. But I did want to shift a bit towards the Middle East, because you had the opportunity there at the UN to speak with the Iranian president. How are they assessing the information, the situation? Because it does seem, at least from my viewpoint, that we might be heading towards yet another war with Iran. But this time it will, probably play out very differently and take on a whole new level of violence. I'm hoping I'm just a very pessimistic human being. But what were your impressions from this meeting with Iran's president? Well, I met this year in a group, again, with President Pezeshkian, and as I had last year, and on both occasions, the president spoke eloquently for peace, and he spoke as a medical doctor, as a surgeon, as a healer. Pezeshkian is someone who is looking for diplomacy and for peace. X not only extraordinarily measured, but X extraordinarily pacific in the rhetoric, no threats. Actually, one felt very sad because one knew, and I felt as I was listening to him, that we can hear the hatred coming from Israel. We heard it from Netanyahu, and I think a very high likelihood that Israel will try to attack again to bring down the Iranian government. But there was no growling by the Iranian side saying if they do this and that, or it was all a talk about the need for a peaceful way out. Yet, unfortunately, in our world right now, if you talk in that way, the other side, which is filled with loathing, detects weakness. And I think that what we heard from Netanyahu was very clear in his demented mind, and he's really, in my view, is an extraordinarily, perhaps the most extraordinarily dangerous person on the whole planet. In his mind, all evil goes back to Iran. Iran must be defeated. He said this absolutely clearly. He talked about the new day that's going to come in Iran. It all seemed to me to be a prelude to another war. And another attack, I should say, because in one way or another, the war has gone on endlessly. And Netanyahu was delighted to recount all of the assassinations that Israel has carried out, all of the decapitation of the Iranian government and others, all of the murders of negotiators with Israel, because Netanyahu's style is, if the other side is negotiating, you kill the negotiator because you're trying to kill the negotiations themselves, because you're trying to conquer. You're not trying to solve a problem or find a peaceful agreement. You're trying to conquer. And that's basically what Netanyahu said. And what Pezeshkian said was the opposite of that. This is one of the tragedies that we've seen in this world actually for decades, but we can see it visibly in full view for the last decade, that Iran has said repeatedly, we want to negotiate. And every time Iran negotiates, it gets hammered. The first time was negotiating a comprehensive plan of action, the JCPOA, which not only was negotiated by then President Barack Obama and the others with Iran, but it went into effect, and then Trump came in and ripped up the agreement and ripped up the basis for a negotiated settlement. The United States and Israel then continued to attack Iran one way or another. Israel launching attacks on Iran and making assassinations of Iranian leaders when